It's strange what you can hear when everyone believes you can't hear anything at all. The doctor called it a miracle, though he said it carefully, like he didn't want to promise too much. After 12 years of silence, of watching lips move and guessing at laughter, of nodding when I wasn't sure what had been said, I could hear again. Not perfectly, not like before, but enough. Enough to catch a whisper. Enough to hear the truth. I sat there in that small, beige office, the faint hum of the air conditioner buzzing above me, and for the first time in over a decade, the world wasn't quiet. It was layered. Shoes tapping in the hallway. Papers shifting on a desk. A nurse laughing somewhere far away. I smiled when the doctor finished explaining, nodded like I always did, but inside something else was happening. Something sharper. Because the first thing I thought wasn't about music, or birds, or even my son's voice. It was about them. About what had been said all these years when I couldn't hear. When I got home, Daniel was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his phone in hand, and Ashley was beside him, her voice low, almost lazy. I stood in the doorway, my purse still hanging from my arm, and I heard her clearly. Just make sure she signs it this week. I'm tired of waiting. Daniel sighed. Like this was an inconvenience, like I was an inconvenience. She won't question it. She never does. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. For a second, I thought maybe I had misunderstood, that my ears were still catching up after all those years. But then Ashley let out a small laugh, the kind she always used when she thought she was being clever. Of course she won't. She can't even hear herself think. Something inside me shifted then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, steady realization settling into place. I stepped forward, making just enough noise for them to notice me, and Ashley's expression changed instantly, her face smoothing into that polished smile she wore so well. "Margaret, you're home early," she said, louder now, every word carefully pronounced. I smiled back, the same gentle smile I had worn for years, and pointed to my ear like I always did, shaking my head slightly, as if to remind her. She nodded, satisfied, already turning away, already dismissing me. And I understood something in that moment with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. They believed I was still trapped in silence. They believed I was harmless, invisible, manageable. I set my purse down slowly, my fingers steady, my expression unchanged. Because for the first time in a very long time, I had the advantage. And I wasn't going to give it away. Not yet. I did not sleep that night, not because of excitement, but because every sound in the house felt new and unfamiliar, like I was living inside someone else's life. The refrigerator hummed steadily in the kitchen, a low, constant vibration I had forgotten existed. The old clock on the hallway wall ticked louder than I ever imagined, each second sharp and deliberate, as if time itself had decided to make up for the years it had been silent to me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Ashley's words over and over again, the casual way she said them, the certainty in her voice. She was not guessing. She was not hoping. She knew something. And Daniel, my son, the boy who used to hold my hand when he crossed the street, had answered her without hesitation, as if this had already been decided long ago. By morning, I understood something even more unsettling. This was not new. Whatever they were planning, it had been happening while I sat at the same table, smiled at the same conversations, trusted the same people. I moved through the house slowly, letting myself listen. The floor creaked under my feet in places I had memorized years ago, but now the sound felt different, heavier somehow, like it carried meaning. I paused outside the kitchen before stepping in, just for a moment, just to hear. Ashley was already there, her voice soft but clear. "We should not wait too long. The market is still strong right now," Daniel replied, quieter, uncertain. "I know. I just do not want any complications." "There will not be any," she said, with a confidence that made my stomach tighten. She trusts us. That is the whole point. I stepped into the room then, letting the cabinet door close a little louder than necessary. Both of them turned immediately. Ashley's smile appeared again, smooth and effortless. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, her tone bright, each word carefully spaced, as if she was speaking to someone much older than her years. I nodded, offering the same calm expression I had practiced for over a decade. I poured myself a cup of coffee, listening to the sound of the liquid filling the mug, steady and real. For years, I had relied on their versions of conversations, their explanations, their reassurances. Ashley had always been the one to lean closer, to repeat things slowly, to guide me through discussions I could not fully follow. I used to think that was kindness. Now, standing there with the truth settling deeper into my bones, I began to wonder how much of it had been carefully edited. How many details had been softened, changed, or left out entirely. I carried my coffee to the table and sat down, watching them without really looking, the way I had learned to do when I depended on reading lips. Only now, I did not need to guess anymore. I listened to the small things. The way Ashley's voice dropped when she spoke to Daniel. The way Daniel hesitated before answering, like he was still trying to convince himself this was right. I did not interrupt. I did not react. I simply listened. Because the silence they believed I lived in had never really belonged to me. It had belonged to them. And now, without them realizing it, they were slowly filling it with everything they had tried to hide. By the third day, I stopped reacting to what I heard and started studying it instead, the way you would study a language you once knew but had forgotten, listening not just to the words but to the spaces between them, the pauses, the hesitations, the small shifts in tone that revealed more than anything spoken out loud. It was not difficult, not after all those years of watching faces and guessing intent, of piecing together meaning from fragments. In some ways, hearing made it easier. In other ways, it made everything worse. That afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual, his footsteps heavier than normal as he walked through the front door, and I could tell something was on his mind before he even spoke. Ashley was in the living room, scrolling on her phone, her voice light when she greeted him, but there was a tightness underneath it that had not been there before. "Did you talk to him?" she asked quietly, not looking up. Daniel hesitated, just for a second. "Yes." He said, "Everything is ready. We just need her signature." Her signature. They said it so easily, like it was a formality, like it was something already theirs. I sat in my chair by the window, knitting needles resting in my lap, my eyes focused on the soft gray yarn even though I was not actually working. I had perfected that stillness over the years, that ability to appear present but uninvolved, to be seen without being noticed. "Then we should not wait," Ashley continued, her voice lowering just enough to signal that this part was not meant for me. "The longer we drag this out, the more chances there are for something to go wrong." Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound of it heavier than it should have been. "She trusts me," he said, almost defensively. "I know," Ashley replied, and there was something in her tone that made my hands go still. "That is why this is so easy." Easy. The words settled over the room like a thin layer of dust, barely visible, but impossible to ignore once you noticed it. I lifted my head slightly, just enough to see their reflections in the dark screen of the television across the room. Ashley leaned closer to him, her posture relaxed, confident, like someone who had already won. Daniel, on the other hand, looked uncertain, his shoulders slightly tense, his gaze shifting more than usual. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who would come to me when something felt wrong, the one who needed reassurance before making a decision. But that moment passed quickly. "We will do it this weekend," Ashley said, her voice firm now, leaving no room for discussion. "I will prepare everything. You just have to get her to sign." I lowered my gaze again, my fingers finally moving against the yarn, slow and steady, each stitch deliberate. I did not look at them. I did not acknowledge what I had heard. But inside, something was becoming clearer with every word they spoke, every plan they laid out, as if I were not even in the room. They were not just hiding something from me. They were building something around me, piece by piece, assuming I would never notice. And for the first time since I began to hear again, I understood exactly what they were counting on. They were counting on the silence. The same silence that had protected them for years. The same silence they believed still surrounded me. And I let them believe it, because the more they spoke, the more they revealed, and I was no longer the one left in the dark. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, not because I had to, but because my mind no longer allowed me the comfort of sleeping through things I did not understand. And as I lay there listening to the faint hum of the heater turning on and off, I began to piece together something far more unsettling than just a conversation about signatures and timing, something that reached back further than a few days or even a few months. I sat up slowly, letting my feet rest on the edge of the bed, and for a moment I just listened to the quiet house, to the absence of movement, to the kind of silence that now felt full instead of empty. and I asked myself a question I had not dared to ask before. How long had this been happening? Not just the plan, not just the papers, but the tone, the control, the quiet decisions made without me. I moved through my morning routine carefully, deliberately, as if each action could help me see more clearly, pouring my coffee, opening the blinds, watching the early light stretch across the living room floor, and with each familiar movement, memories began to surface in a different light. Moments that once felt small, forgettable, even reasonable, now shifted into something else entirely. I remembered the first time Ashley insisted on handling my mail, how she smiled, and said it would be easier for everyone if she sorted it first, how she would hand me only what she thought I needed to see, always with that same patient tone, always making it sound like she was helping. I remembered the way Daniel stopped discussing finances with me, how conversations that used to include me slowly became summaries delivered after decisions had already been made, how I accepted it because I believed I was the one who had become limited, the one who needed things simplified. I remembered documents placed in front of me with gentle explanations, Ashley pointing to where I should sign, her voice calm and reassuring as she described things I could not fully verify, and I trusted her, not because I was careless, but because I thought I had no reason not to. Standing there in the kitchen, holding my coffee cup, I felt a slow, steady realization settle into place. This had not started with the papers. This had started with access, with control, with the assumption that I would not question what I could not hear. I heard footsteps behind me then, soft but distinct, and I did not turn right away. Ashley's voice came next, light and composed. "You are up early," she said, each word measured just enough to reach me. I turned with the same mild smile, nodding slightly, pointing toward the coffee as if to explain myself. She watched me for a second longer than usual, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for something, but then she relaxed, satisfied, and moved past me to the counter. I listened as she opened a drawer, the quiet slide of wood against wood suddenly sharp in my ears, and then the rustle of paper followed. "We should go over everything again tonight," she said when Daniel entered the room a few minutes later. "I want to make sure there are no mistakes." Daniel hesitated, his voice lower when he answered. "Are you sure this is necessary?" Ashley did not raise her voice, but there was a firmness in it now that had not been there before. "Yes, it is." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest, grounding me, steadying me, because the picture was no longer incomplete. It was forming clearly now, piece by piece, and for the first time, I was not looking back with confusion. I was looking back with understanding. And that changed everything. That evening, I did something I had not done in years. I paid attention to everything. Not just what they said, but what they touched, what they avoided, what they assumed I would never notice. After dinner, Ashley cleared the table with her usual efficiency, stacking plates, moving through the kitchen with practiced ease, while Daniel lingered near the counter, his movements slower, uncertain. I stayed seated, folding my hands in my lap, my expression calm, my eyes soft, exactly the way they expected. Ashley returned a few minutes later with a small folder in her hand, the kind people use for documents that matter. I had seen folders like that before. I had signed papers from folders like that before. "Margaret," she said, her voice gentle, almost warm, as she placed it on the table in front of me. "We just need to go over a few things. It is nothing complicated." Nothing complicated. I nodded slowly, leaning forward just enough to show attention, while inside, every part of me sharpened. I watched as she opened the folder, her fingers precise, confident, turning each page to the exact spot she wanted. "This is just to help manage the property," she continued, her tone smooth, practiced. "It will make things easier for everyone." Easier for everyone. Daniel shifted beside her, his hand resting on the back of the chair, not quite sitting, not quite standing. "Mom, it is just paperwork," he added, his voice softer, almost apologetic. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a brief moment, I saw the hesitation he was trying to hide. It was small, but it was there. Ashley slid a pen toward me, placing it exactly where my hand would naturally fall. "You can sign right here," she said, tapping the page lightly. I followed her gesture, my eyes moving across the document, not because they expected me to read it, but because I needed to see how confident she was in her control. The words blurred together at first, but certain phrases stood out. "Transfer," Authorization. Ownership. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the edge of the table, but my face remained unchanged. I lifted the pen slowly, letting the moment stretch just a little longer than usual, enough to make them watch me more closely. And then I paused. Not dramatically, not enough to alarm them, just enough to create a small crack in their certainty. Ashley's voice came quickly, filling the space. "It is all standard," she said, a hint of impatience slipping through her calm tone. "We have already taken care of everything else." Everything else. I lowered the pen slightly, tilting my head the way I always did when I needed something repeated, pointing gently toward the paper as if asking for clarification. Ashley leaned in immediately, her voice rising just enough to reach what she believed was my limit. "This allows us to manage the house for you," she explained, slower now, clearer, as if simplifying something for a child. "Manage the house." I nodded again, slowly, thoughtfully, and set the pen down instead of signing. Just for a moment. Just long enough to shift the balance. Daniel noticed. I could hear it in the way his breathing changed, in the subtle movement of his weight shifting from one foot to the other. Ashley noticed too, though she hid it better. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her smile still in place, but tighter now. I shook my head gently, offering a small, reassuring smile, then reached for the pen again, letting my fingers rest on it without moving. Because in that moment, I understood something they did not. They believed this was the final step. They believed I was exactly where they needed me to be. But for the first time, I was not following their lead. I was setting the pace. And they had no idea. I let the pen rest against the paper for just a second longer before finally lowering it. Not signing. Not yet. But placing it carefully beside the document, as if I simply needed more time to understand. More time to feel comfortable. And I could sense the shift immediately, subtle but unmistakable. Ashley's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the folder, her smile holding but no longer as effortless as before, while Daniel leaned forward just a fraction, his voice cautious. "Mom, it is really straightforward," he said, as if reassurance could replace explanation. I looked at him, letting my expression soften, then gently pushed the paper back toward Ashley, shaking my head slightly, the same familiar gesture I had used for years when something felt unclear. Ashley inhaled slowly, and this time when she spoke, there was a faint edge beneath her calm tone. "We already explained everything," she said, a little more firmly, then quickly corrected herself, her voice smoothing again. "But we can go over it again tomorrow. There is no rush." No rush. But there had been a rush just moments ago. I nodded, offering a small, apologetic smile, and stood up, carrying my empty cup to the sink, moving slowly, deliberately, giving them space to speak freely once they thought I was out of reach. I turned on the faucet just enough to create a soft, steady stream of water, then paused, listening. "What was that?" Ashley whispered sharply the moment she thought I could not hear. She has never hesitated before. Daniel's voice came lower, uncertain. "Maybe she just wants to be careful." "Careful now," Ashley replied, the frustration no longer hidden. "After everything has already been set up?" I kept my back to them, my hands resting lightly on the counter, letting the water run, letting them continue. "We cannot keep delaying this," she went on, her voice tightening. "If something changes, if someone else gets involved, we could lose everything." Lose everything. The words settled heavily, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed what I already knew. This was not just convenience. This was urgency. This was risk. Daniel did not answer right away, and in that silence, I heard something I had not expected. Doubt. "Maybe we should slow down," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "Just until she signs." Ashley let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "You are thinking like a son," she said, almost dismissively. "You need to start thinking about what is best for us. Us. Not family. Not everyone. Just us." I turned off the faucet then, drying my hands carefully, giving myself a moment before facing them again, because everything was clearer now than it had ever been. They were not just asking for trust. They were depending on it. Depending on the version of me that could not question, could not hear, could not protect herself. I walked back toward the table with the same calm pace, the same gentle expression, and Ashley's smile returned instantly, as if nothing had changed. "We will look at it again tomorrow," she said, her voice warm, controlled. already rewriting the moment to fit her plan. I nodded once more, sitting down, folding my hands neatly in front of me, and for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to feel something close to certainty. Not about what they were doing. That part was already clear, but about what I was going to do next, because they believed they still had time. And that was the one mistake I intended to use against them. The next morning, I did not wait for them to bring the papers back to me, and that alone changed something in the rhythm of the house, something subtle but important, because for the first time in a long time, I was the one initiating the next step. I dressed slowly, choosing the same soft gray sweater I had worn countless times before, the one that made me look harmless, predictable, exactly the way they expected me to be, and I made sure everything about me felt familiar, unchanged, even as my thoughts moved in a very different direction. Ashley was already on the phone when I walked into the living room, her voice low and controlled, but I caught enough. "No, she did not sign yet," she said, pacing slightly near the window. "I will handle it today." There was a pause, then a quieter sentence, sharper. "We cannot afford delays." I kept walking, letting my steps be heard just enough, and her voice shifted instantly, smoothing out as she ended the call. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, her smile appearing right on cue. I nodded gently, then moved toward the small desk near the hallway where the house phone sat, something I had not used in years, not since everything had become easier for them to manage for me. I picked it up slowly, dialing a number from memory, one I had not called in a very long time, and I could feel Ashley watching me, even though she said nothing. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered, older, steadier. "This is Robert Hayes." I listened to the sound of his voice carefully, grounding myself in something that still felt real. "Robert," I said clearly, my voice calm, measured, no longer shaped by silence. There was a pause on the other end, a sharp intake of breath. "Margaret," he said, disbelief and recognition mixing together. "Yes," I replied simply. "I need to see you today." I did not explain more, not over the phone, not with Ashley standing just a few feet away pretending not to listen. Robert had been my husband's attorney for years, a man who understood details, who paid attention to things most people overlooked, and more importantly, a man who knew me before I became someone others spoke for. "Of course," he said without hesitation. "Come by this afternoon." I thanked him and hung up slowly, placing the receiver back in its cradle with deliberate care, then turned to face Ashley, who was now watching me openly, her expression carefully neutral. "Who was that?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes searching. I offered a small, apologetic smile, tapping my ear gently, then gesturing vaguely toward the door as if to suggest a routine appointment, something unimportant, something easily dismissed. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then nodded, her smile returning, but it did not reach her eyes this time. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, her voice perfectly composed. I nodded again, picking up my purse, moving toward the door with the same slow, steady pace I had always used, but inside, everything was different now. Because for the first time, I was not reacting to what they were doing. I was moving ahead of them, and they still believed they were in control. I had not been back to Robert's office in years, but the moment I stepped inside, everything felt exactly the same. The faint scent of old paper and polished wood, the quiet ticking of a wall clock that seemed to move more deliberately than time itself. And for a brief second, I allowed myself to feel something close to relief, something steady and familiar in a situation that had become anything but. Robert stood as soon as he saw me, his expression shifting from professional composure to something more personal, more concerned. "Margaret," he said again, as if confirming that I was really standing there in front of him, speaking clearly, hearing him without hesitation. I nodded once, taking a seat across from his desk, placing my purse carefully in my lap, my posture calm, controlled, even though everything inside me was still aligning, still settling into place. "I will not waste your time," I said, my voice even, deliberate. "I need you to look at something before I sign anything." His expression sharpened immediately, the years of experience behind his eyes coming forward in an instant. "Of course," he replied, leaning slightly forward. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder Ashley had prepared, placing it on the desk between us without a word, letting him open it himself, letting him see what I had already begun to understand. The room grew quieter as he turned each page, his eyes moving steadily, his brow tightening just enough to confirm what I needed to know. He did not speak right away, and I did not interrupt him, because silence, I had learned, often revealed more than questions ever could. Finally, he closed the folder slowly, resting his hand on top of it as he looked at me directly. "Did they explain this to you?" he asked. I held his gaze, then shook my head once, calmly, because the truth was not about what they said. It was about what they chose not to say. Robert exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Margaret, this is not management paperwork," he said, his tone careful but firm. "This transfers significant control of your property and financial decisions to them. Once signed, you would have very limited authority left." Limited authority. The words settled into something solid, something undeniable. I nodded once, not because I was surprised, but because hearing it confirmed out loud changed the weight of it. "And if I do not sign?" I asked. "Then nothing changes," he replied immediately. "Everything remains in your control, exactly as it is now." I let that sit for a moment, the simplicity of it, the clarity, the contrast to everything I had been told at home. "I need copies of everything," I said finally. "And I need you to review anything else that has been signed in the past few years." Robert's expression shifted again, more serious now, more focused. "Of course," he said. "I will go through everything thoroughly." I stood slowly, gathering my things, but before I turned to leave, I paused just long enough to say one more thing, something I had not planned but now felt necessary. "Do not contact them," I said quietly. "Not yet." He studied me for a moment, then nodded once, understanding without needing further explanation. As I stepped back outside into the afternoon light, the world sounded different again, not because it was new, but because I finally understood how much had been hidden within it. And for the first time since this began, I was not just listening anymore. I was preparing. I returned home just before dinner, not rushing, not hesitating, but moving with the same quiet rhythm I had always carried, because nothing about me needed to appear different, not yet, not until everything was exactly where I needed it to be. Ashley was already in the kitchen, her movements sharp, controlled, as if she had been waiting. And Daniel stood nearby, his posture tense in a way that told me they had been talking long before I walked through the door. "There you are," Ashley said, her voice smooth but too quick, too prepared. "We thought you might want to finish the paperwork tonight." I nodded gently, setting my purse down, offering the same calm expression they had grown used to, then took my seat at the table without a word, folding my hands neatly in front of me. Ashley wasted no time. The folder appeared again, placed carefully in front of me, open to the exact page, the pen positioned exactly where it had been before. "It will only take a moment," she said, her tone soft, encouraging. Daniel added, quieter this time, "It is just to make things easier." Easier. I looked down at the paper, then slowly reached for the pen, letting my fingers wrap around it, feeling the weight of it, the expectation attached to something so small. I paused just long enough for them to lean in slightly, just long enough for anticipation to settle into the room. And then, without looking up, I spoke. "You should have told me the truth." The silence that followed was immediate and absolute, like the air itself had been pulled out of the room. I lifted my gaze slowly, meeting Ashley's eyes first, watching the way her expression froze, the way her confidence cracked just enough to reveal what had been underneath all along. Daniel's reaction came a second later, confusion turning quickly into something closer to fear. "Mom?" he said, his voice uncertain. I set the pen down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the paper, my movements steady, deliberate. "You said I would not question it." I continued, my voice calm, even, every word clear. "You said I trust you." Ashley's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Not yet. I let the moment stretch, let them feel it, the shift they had never prepared for. "You also said," I added, turning my eyes to Daniel now, "that I cannot hear myself think." His face changed instantly, the color draining just enough to confirm what I already knew. "I can hear you," I said simply. That was all it took. Ashley stepped back slightly, her composure slipping for the first time, her voice no longer controlled when she spoke. "Since when?" she asked, the question sharp, unguarded. I did not answer right away. I did not need to. Instead, I reached into my purse and placed a second set of papers on the table, sliding them forward just enough for them to see. Before I sign anything, I said, I wanted to understand exactly what I was signing. Daniel stared at the documents, his hands unmoving, while Ashley's eyes moved quickly across the pages, recognition flashing through them, followed by something colder, something calculating. You went behind our backs, she said, her voice tightening. I held her gaze, steady, unshaken. No, I replied. I listened. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was different. This time, it did not belong to them. Because for the first time, the silence was not hiding anything. It was revealing everything.